It's incredible how you've, each item of life, you've gone so subtle and so profound, no? To investigate each part as a, no, very profound, I mean, as a whole. It's very interesting.
Yeah. But it's amazing, isn't it, that,
it's
that
amazing.
we don't see birth as something.
Yes, it's amazing.
In psychiatry, in current psychiatry, the birth is taken into consideration only if it was so bad that it damaged irreversibly the brain cells.
Incredible.
As long as it doesn't,
no one looks at it.
It isn't seen as relevant. And of course, the damage of the brain cells can be related to retardation, or can be related to hyperactivity or something like that. And that's the only significance that we attribute to birth.
Incredible.
So for me, that was a tremendous lesson. I couldn't believe that I've ever shared that kind of perspective.
It's interesting how you've gone far beyond what was written or studied, no? I mean, traditional psychology came to a point and you went far away, far off, no? Where nothing was written or investigated.
But you don't have a choice. I mean, when you do the work, I mean, it just forces you to change your thinking.
Yes, when you find that it doesn't, how do you say, what you find that's done, it's not enough. You have to go far beyond that.
True.
That's in. You were talking first as we were talking of the maps you draw of consciousness. You talked about the perinatal, no?
We talked about the first two.
The first two
matrices, yeah. So just very briefly, the third matrix involves usually images of some situations of powerful energies, and also aggressive images. So a lot of images from battles, for example, wars and revolutions and so on. There could be some distorted sexual imagery, pornographic or deviant, sadomasochistic, criminal sexuality, images of rapes or sexual murders and so on. Particularly if the birth was very bloody, very sort of difficult. And then as the person is emerging, there could be these archetypal images of deities representing death, rebirth. Again, coming from different cultures. Then there's usually the final stage is experience as passing through fire, a sense of the body burning as the energies, the pent-up energies are released. There is an experience of passing through purifying fire, and then kind of emerging into light, where there could be golden light, white light. There could be rainbow spectra. There could be peacock designs or archetypal deities appearing in light. So it's not just a replay of the biological birth, but also the specific connection to the archetypal world. So it's not just a reliving of birth, but it's kind of a psychospiritual rebirth. It's very fascinating how important this phenomenon is if you study religions. The idea of being born again, being sort of reborn.
Death and rebirth.
This is essential for shamanism. The shamanic crisis is typically a spontaneous visionary experience that involves a powerful death rebirth. This is what starts the career of many shamans. Then the so-called rites of passage, rituals conducted in native cultures, they all revolve around a death rebirth experience. For example, in the puberty rite, which is the most important one, these initiates would have powerful death rebirth experiences, and this would be interpreted as dying in the old role and being born into the
new one.
You die as a girl and you're now born as a woman or a boy and a man and so on. Then we have the ancient mysteries of death rebirth, which are very, very prevalent in the ancient world. The mysteries of Inanna and Tammuz in Sumer, or Isis and Osiris in Egypt, or the Bacchanalia, the Dionysian rites, the mysteries of Eleusis, Eleusinian mysteries, the mysteries of Xibalba, which were the Mayan version. So this was an amazing phenomenon. For example, the Eleusinian mysteries were conducted for a period of almost 2,000 years, from 1400 BC to 400 AD, and it wasn't that people lost interest in them. They were actually stopped by a specific verdict by the Pope, which stopped all pagan rituals and ceremonies.
It had a sense, no?
Yeah.
They stopped something that.
But it's an institution that has not been acknowledged and adequately appreciated. You know, if you read the list of people who participated in the ancient world in these mysteries, it includes some amazing personalities. It's almost like who is who in antiquity. Plato and Aristotle have written. They were both initiates in these mysteries. Alcibiades was the military leader. Pindarus, a poet. You know, Cicero.
Cicero. Yes, all of them.
Now, what is incredible is the number of these people. Christina and I visited Eleusis 2 years ago, and we saw the ruins of the Telestrion, which is the hall where the experiences were happening. And we asked, you know, how many people were involved, and this was over 3,000 people at a time. So if you take from a relatively small ancient world, you take 3,000 people every 5 years, and you put them through this powerful procedure, it has to have an impact on the culture.
Incredible.
And the question is, what was done there? There's a very interesting book by Albert Hoffman, the discoverer of LSD. Gordon Wasson, who brought the mushrooms from Mexico to Europe, and Karl Rack, who was a Greek scholar, and it's called Road to Eleusis. And they came to the conclusion that after several years of study that the key to these mysteries was a potion which was called Kykeon, Kykeon, which was administered there, and they found out that this was a preparation of ergot, very similar to LSD. So people were having really powerful experiences. So, you know, we wonder about the ingenuity of the Greeks, all the interesting ideas that they had, and this had to have a tremendous impact on that culture.
Surely. What do you think, Stan, is the principal benefit of a person going through a psychological death, or the phenomenon I see you call dying before dying?
Yes. I think it's extremely important, and a very important part of it is the fact that it means sort of conscious processing of the trauma of birth and the element of death which was involved. You know, that death is in birth in two different ways. One is the fact that it's the death of the fetus and birth of an air-breathing, very, very different creature. So we are in the womb. We you know, are water creatures. We are aquatic creatures. We are in the amniotic fluid. We get all the supply through the umbilical cord. When we are born, we have to rebuild completely our organism. We have to open the lungs. The lungs are collapsed in the fetus. We have to open the lungs, and the whole circulation has to be rebuilt, and we become, you know, air-breathing organisms. So in a sense, it is a death of one form of existence to another. But death is also very significantly present in a different way, which is during the transition, during the passage, our life is actually threatened. Our biological survival is threatened, depending on how difficult the delivery was. But in some instances, the child actually dies in the birth canal and has to be resuscitated. So for some people, birth was actually death. Now, when we are born, according to these observations, we are born anatomically. We get out of the situation, but we are not born emotionally. We haven't really caught up with it. So inside of us, the memory of the struggle and the danger is still very alive. And so we live with with kind of a deep feeling of fear of death. And many of the things that we do in life, in a sense, are inauthentic because they're still ways of dealing with this trauma, or are significantly influenced by the trauma. For example, I mentioned before the fact that we cannot enjoy life, we cannot see the perspective in life. So the extreme form, we could be depressed to different degrees. If another aspect of the birth process is more relevant, which is that element of the struggle, then it creates a kind of an attitude towards life where the solution always seems to be in the future. Like things are not fine the way they are. I have to get somewhere else. Something else has to happen so that I feel comfortable. So how much money do I need to really live? How much fame? How much power? How much status? And then we create a certain kind of a project. The existentialists talk about it as auto-project. We see ourselves in the future where things are going to be great. When I'm going to be a doctor, when I get my medical degree, life will be different. You have a different
attitude.
So we always see ourselves in the future, pursuing, chasing the future. Now there are two things that can happen. The first is that the goal is too high, or for whatever other reason, we simply don't get to that situation. And then we continue feeling uncomfortable, and we believe that it's because we didn't get what we wanted. Now the second situation is when we get there and we find out that nothing changed, that we still feel dissatisfied, and we don't say this was a wrong strategy. We say that the goal was not big enough, or it wasn't the right kind of goal. So then life becomes what people who get insight into this pattern, they call this kind of life as treadmill type of existence. Like when a hamster is in this little wheel and is kind of running and constantly running somewhere and not getting anywhere, or a rat race. People talk about rat race existence, where we sort of work towards something and we don't really fully enjoy what we have. We always want something else. And this could be played on any level of, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, millions, billions. And we see people who already have what we think would do it for us, doesn't do it for them. Otherwise, people like Howard Hughes or Onassis,
they have it all,
Christine Onassis, they would have to be, the happiest people of them all. And this obviously, it doesn't deliver, and we don't see that it's a loser strategy, whether we are achieving or not achieving. Because once we get beyond the point of basic survival, it's different in Rwanda or in Ethiopia and so on, when survival is a question. But once we get to the point that we have a place to stay, and we know that we get our dinner and so on, beyond that point, any kind of significant improvement comes from inner transformation. We have to develop a different connection to life, so that we can almost appreciate that we participate in consciousness, that we are alive. And then when we are in that place, then whatever comes beyond that is like an additional bonus. But if we don't have that connection to life, that nothing that we have materially will really bring any satisfaction.
Okay, we have to go. Stan, please, could you tell us a little bit about transpersonal psychology?
Well, I think we should probably start from transpersonal experiences, which is what somehow inspired transpersonal psychology. So it would be the third domain in the psyche after the biographical and the perinatal. And this is a domain that we call now transpersonal. And what characterizes those experiences is that in those experiences we somehow expand, or our consciousness expands beyond the usual boundaries, beyond the boundaries of what's called body ego, or what Alan Watts called skin encapsulated ego. So in a transpersonal experience, we can suddenly have a sense that our boundaries are melting, and we become one with other people, or we can actually become another person and lose our own identity, what would be called a mediumistic experience. In the extreme, we can have the feeling of becoming consciousness of all of humanity, for example, or some specific part of it, like there could be a sense of becoming all mothers of the world, or becoming all soldiers of the world. Extremely sort of large, encompassing experiences. It doesn't have to stay in the human realm. We can also go into the animal realm, for example, and have experiences of different life forms, from primates all the way down to viruses, to bacteria. We can even go into the botanical realm. I had, for example, at one point, the experience of becoming a Venus flytrap, a carnivorous plant. And I had the taste, that was the taste of a fly digested by the enzymes of a carnivorous plant. I had a sort of personal experience of that. Another experience of becoming a sequoia tree and experiencing the photosynthesis in the branches and the exchange of water and minerals in the roots. Unbelievable, fantastic experiences. Sometimes even inorganic matter. You can become consciousness of the ocean, or you have a sense that you became consciousness of granite, for example. So in this category of experiences, everything that in everyday life we can experience as an object outside of ourselves in the non-ordinary states has a corresponding subjective state, as if all of existence is about consciousness. There's nothing that is not consciousness. Very different from the distinction that we make between the organic world and the inorganic world, or us being conscious and the plant life not being conscious, and so on. It's very much confirming the kind of tenet of the spiritual philosophies of the East, where they would see, the Hindus would see all of existence as transformations of Brahma, or expressions of the Tao, and so on. Another category of transpersonal experiences transcends time. Normally we can experience only the present moment and the present location. Like 5 minutes from now, what's happening here is going to be just memory. It's going to be gone. Whereas in non-ordinary states, we can actually fully experience anything from the past with all the sensory qualities. So we can experience things from the French Revolution, or from ancient Egypt, and so on. Sometimes just as such, but other times with a sense of personal memory. You would have the feeling that what is happening to you is not the first time it's happening, that you actually once lived in that other time as another person. And then, of course, that opens the whole realm of reincarnation and karma. We understand why so many cultures independently in the world believed in reincarnation. I actually wouldn't call it belief. When they asked Jung during an interview when he was over 80 years old, and he was interviewed by a BBC journalist, and at one point the journalist asked him, "Dr. Jung, do you believe in God?" And this wonderful smile came on his face, and he says, "I don't believe, I know. I had the experience of being grabbed by something that was far bigger than myself." What he was trying to say is that when we have a direct experience of spiritual realities, we don't call it belief anymore. If we have to say, "I believe in God," "I don't believe in God," "I believe in reincarnation," "I don't believe," that means that we really don't have anything to go by. We are influenced by what our parents told us, or what we heard in church, or what we read. Once we have a direct experience, we just simply have to incorporate it into our worldview. So To me, reincarnation is a pragmatic thing. This is not a speculation. It is based on very powerful experiences and very interesting phenomena surrounding them. This is an attempt to account for those experiences. So that's a very important category of experiences when we can go into the past, and what's interesting, in some instances, to a much smaller extent, sometimes also into the future. Like I've seen precognitive experiences that came true, or sometimes people have kind of revealing visions of the future. A lot of it is happening in near-death experiences, for example. Even people who have the UFO abduction phenomena sometimes have these visions of
the future.
So those are the two important categories of transpersonal experiences when we transcend the spatial boundaries and become something or somebody else in the universe, and learn new things. You see, the important thing to emphasize here, if you, let's say, become other people, or you become animals, or you become elements of plant life, it frequently provides access to absolutely new information about these phenomena, which goes way beyond the education of those people or specific training. You can, for example, experience yourself as an eagle. You have the body image of the eagle, and you understand exactly how the eagle flies, how you work the air currents.
Incredible.
Which is a powerful argument against the fact that this kind of thing can come from television or from movies or from books, because these media don't convey kinesthetic experiences. Or you can see the ground as an eagle, and it's a different perception from a human. For example, everything's magnified. The raptor birds have the lens much closer to the surface, and also there's what's called bifocal vision. They can zoom. So in many of these experiences, absolutely new information comes that's far beyond the intellectual knowledge of these people. There's also another category of experience which is even more astounding than these first two, which is a type of experience that takes us into the archetypal realm, or into the mythological realm, the world of deities and demons, and or mythological landscapes and domains and so on, where we can encounter deities. We can also experience ourselves as deities. You can sort of have a vision of the great Mother Goddess, or you can experience yourself as the great Mother Goddess. You can experience yourself as the dancing Shiva. And in all these experiences, there's also access about accurate information about mythologies, frequently mythologies that you have never studied. Okay? This confirms really Jung's idea that beside the Freudian individual unconscious, we have also the collective unconscious, both historical, where we can get access to historical events, and the mythological, the archetypal, where we can get accurate information about mythological realities that we have never known in this lifetime. We have never studied them. I can give you a quick example. When I was working in Prague with psychedelics, I worked with a man who had very severe phobia of death. It's called thanatophobia. And he was going through a perinatal session, and suddenly, as part of that session, he saw a cave, and in front of it was a goddess in the form of a pig, a big goddess. And he suddenly sat up and opened his eyes, and he said he needed paper, something to draw. And he created a number of very complex kind of labyrinths or geometrical patterns, and was not satisfied with them and was crumpling them and throwing them away. And we spent, long time trying to do free associations, trying to understand what this was about, using the Freudian technique. There was just no clue. And so, I just kind of forgot about it. And then when I came to the United States, I became a very close friend of Joseph Campbell. And he used to come regularly to Esalen and, have dinners with us and so on. And I always had a list of mythological experiences that people had that I didn't understand. And he was this incredible encyclopedia, walking encyclopedia of mythology. And so he would tell me, this is coming from this culture, that culture. And we were having dinner, and I remember this experience, and I told him about it. And he said, oh yeah, this was the great devouring mother night of the moleculans from New Guinea. And he said that they actually breed pigs. The boys breed pigs, and they kill the pig ritually, and it symbolizes the separation from the mother. And then they believe also that when you die, you will be brought in front of this great mother goddess who is the form of a pig, and you have to draw a specific labyrinth design. Otherwise, you cannot make the passage through death. So they practice their whole life drawing these kinds of patterns. So suddenly this this whole element of this molecular mythology sort of came through that person's experience. It made a lot of sense because his major issue was fear of death. But of course, even Joseph Campbell could not explain why at that particular time, for that particular patient, that mythology sort of had to emerge.
So in those states, you have access to a lot of information that's far away from what you must have known.
Sure.
And it's very interesting how you transcend time and space. You can
see what emerges here is very, very interesting. That is a completely new understanding of what it is to be a human being. The way I was trained, a human being is a Newtonian object. We are made of cells and tissues and organs, and then we have this one organ, which is the brain, that somehow, nobody knows really how, generates consciousness. That's the basic assumption of Western materialistic science, that somehow consciousness emerges out of this complexity of the neurophysiological processes. So that's our definition. And of course we can do all kinds of interesting things. You can conduct brain operations and transplants, and current medicine certainly uses that kind of a model. But if you work with non-ordinary states, you'll find out something different about human beings, and that is that under certain circumstances we can transcend time and space and linear causality. We can experience ourselves as anything from the body ego to the cosmic creative principle. Whether we call it Brahma or the Tao or the cosmic Christ or Allah. I mean, we can have the experience of actually becoming God, becoming the divine. In the Upanishads, there is a sentence, Tattvam Asi in Sanskrit, which means thou art that. You're not really Nama Rupa, you're not the name and the shape. You are the divinity or the divine. And there are sort of boundaries, many boundaries between you and the divine, but they all can be transcended. So you find out in experiencing non-ordinary states and studying them that we don't have fixed identity. We are not the body ego. We are sort of anything on the continuum between the body ego and the creative principle itself. So ultimately, from this perspective, we are a field of consciousness that has no limits, that transcends time and space and linear causality. Now, at the same time, it makes a lot of sense to think about ourselves as Newtonian objects. So if you take this into consideration, you get a kind of a complementary definition, paradoxical definition of human beings. You say, well, we are material objects, but we are also infinite fields of consciousness. It's a very, very strange paradox that in some sense echoes remotely what the physicists found on the subatomic level about subatomic matter and also light, which is the Niels Bohr's complementary principle, the wave-particle definition of matter. The physicists in the first 3 decades were developing quantum physics. They were running into this incredible paradox that in some experiments it seemed that subatomic matter and light were of particular nature, but in some other experiments they have wave-like properties. And they first were trying to find what Einstein called a visualizable model, to really imagine what they were working with. It's very difficult to imagine what it is that can manifest as a particle and as a wave. And so Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum physics, set a precedent here that instead of solving the paradox, he actually codified it and had the principle of complementarity, that if you want to define what light is and what subatomic matter is, you simply have to accept that you're dealing with something that has a wave aspect and a particle aspect, and they would manifest under different circumstances. And actually which aspect it manifests depends on what kind of experiment you conduct. Fritjof Capra, a good friend of mine, says in these kinds of experiments, if you ask a particle question, you get a particle answer. If you ask a wave question, you get a wave answer. And it's interesting that Niels Bohr wrote a book where he said that he believes that ultimately this paradox will appear in all other scientific disciplines, that physics is just the first one.
He won the Nobel Prize for that discovery, no?
Yes, so we now have a similar kind of complementarity on a totally different level, many dimensions higher, where we have to define human beings in a paradoxical way. And there's now an interesting possibility of trying to integrate those two, which is of course the holonomic, the holographic thinking. If you have holograms, you have a field of light that's unified. There are no boundaries, and out of it comes the holographic image, basically created by interference within that unified field of light. So we could somehow think about reality in a similar way. It's a vibratory system that ultimately is unified, and out of it, through interference, come, the standing waves kind of come discrete objects. So that this in the world there is separation, but on a deeper level, the underlying unity.
Do you think then that the mind works like an hologram?
I think it's a very interesting model. Karl Pribram, the very famous neurosurgeon and brain researcher, has actually a model, holographic model of the brain, showing how beside the kind of linear connections, computer-like connections in the brain, there's also what he calls parallel processing, which uses holographic principles. It's a very, very interesting model for the mystical systems and for transpersonal phenomena, because mystics, claim a number of things that don't make any sense to traditional thinking, which is basically 17th century, Cartesian Newtonian thinking. For example, saying things like, each of us are separate from each other, but then, we're all one. So this seems bizarre. This seems sort of violating the Aristotelian logic, but not in the holographic world, because you have this unified field out of which emerge sort of the discrete images. There's another statement that we hear from the mystics, which is very quizzical, doesn't make any sense from a traditional perspective, which is each of us obviously is an insignificant part of an extremely large universe. But the mystics say, but then again, each of us is the whole universe, is the whole thing. So we have to ask the question, what are we? Are we a part or are we the whole? And again, the holographic thinking can transcend this, because in a holographic system we see that the information about the whole is encoded in every part. In ancient Greece, there were two categories of schools giving different ideas about what is important to know about the universe. There was the Ionic school from Miletus, where they were arguing, because they believed that the most important thing is to ask the question, what is the universe made of? So they were asking how much fire, how much earth, how much water. People like Thales, Anaximenes, Anaximandros, and so on. But there was another category of schools that didn't agree. They said the most important thing is to ask, where does order come from? Where does pattern come from? Where does meaning come from? And matter is just a way of expressing certain kind of creative idea. And those were the Pythagoreans, for example, saying that the most important thing is number and relationship, ratio, and so on. And the Platonists and the Neoplatonists who were talking about archetypes, and what you see in the world is an expression of this timeless archetype. So what are archetypes? So what we see now in modern science is that we have the atomic and the molecular theory, which is in a sense a refinement and development of the position of the school of Miletus. Science is telling us what the world is made of, but if you think about it, it's not the whole question, because it's not just the building block, but also the form and the pattern. Rupert Sheldrake says you can have a certain amount of water and glass and wood and so on, and you can build a castle, a cathedral, and a tenement house. And if you do what Western science does, which is just measuring and weighing, you will have absolutely no clue why one structure is a cathedral. And there's an enactment, embodiment of a creative idea, which the kinds of methods that Western science has cannot really capture. It would be like coming to Mona Lisa and believing that we can understand Mona Lisa by knowing everything about the frame, the wood of the frame and the paints and the canvas. So the modern science, the new paradigm, is now really returning to the Platonic and the Pythagorean ideas. In quantum physics, matter is really ultimately expressed in mathematical equations and probabilities. And there's nothing tangible there. There's no material. And also the idea of the Platonic idea of the archetypes is now returning into science.
Oh, interesting. And what do you think, Stan, is the relationship between matter and consciousness?
Again, you have these two positions, or three positions actually, in the history of philosophy. One extreme is the materialist, which is now dominant in a sense, which is only matter exists, and then life, consciousness, intelligence are just byproducts, more or less accidental, insignificant if you look at it from the cosmic perspective. There are billions of galaxies, light years, and so on. And even if there's life and consciousness on some other planets, by and large, it has taken like billions of years before consciousness emerged in a relatively insignificant part of the universe. The other extreme is only consciousness is real. We can explain the experience of the material world as being a virtual reality that's created by the technology of consciousness. 20 years from now, when virtual reality is improved, we can have experiences of worlds with all the qualities. We'll see and hear and touch things, and those things will not be there. And then you have this psychophysical parallelism, where they believe that sort of material processes and consciousness kind of go in parallel. They both exist. I wrote a book which is now being published, which is called The Cosmic Game, basically summarizing the observations from non-ordinary states on these kinds of fundamental, ontological, cosmological questions. And this would pretty much be my position as well, because my worldview has been shaped very strongly by the experiences of non-ordinary states. So I believe that ultimately it is consciousness that is real, and matter, the way we experience it, is not real. It is actually supported by modern physics these days. If you study this table, the deeper you go, the less you will be finding, until you discover that matter is essentially empty. You end up with probabilities on the deep level. So even scientific analysis of the world will show you that the kind of a Newtonian stuff disappears, but what doesn't disappear is order, is pattern, is equation, which we would link more to consciousness than to our concept of matter in the everyday sense. So I really believe that ultimately when we analyze matter, either experientially or scientifically, that we find out that ultimately it is consciousness that is real. In Kashmir Shaivism, which is a system that I like very much, the idea is that the supreme principle in the universe is what they call Shiva. It's not the Shiva of the Hindu pantheon. It's a different use of the word Shiva. When I asked Lakshmanju, who was a very major exponent of Kashmir Shaivism, I asked him, why is it called also Shiva? He said, because the Indians like the name Shiva. But for them, the supreme principle is the fact of consciousness and the fact of existence, the fact that something exists, which in itself is a tremendous mystery. Why should anything exist rather than not exist? So the existence, and then consciousness, but the fact of consciousness, not a specific content of consciousness. So when we experientially explore reality, the boundaries will be merging, and shapes and forms will be seen as relative manifestations. But what ultimately remains is the fact of existence, consciousness, and that the fact that this principle is capable of creating experiential worlds. And doesn't make much difference whether it's the world of archetypes, the deities, and heavens and hells, or whether it's traffic in Manhattan and Virgin Islands, and the Amazon. So I definitely would sort of lean more towards believing that consciousness is absolute, and the experience of the material world is created as virtual reality, rather than seeing it the way I was trained.
Well, Stan, it was a pleasure to have you here. It was a fantastic interview, and we thank you a lot.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
No.
It was a pleasure.